Well, hello, welcome to the channel if you're new to the channel, and if you're not new to the channel, welcome back. In this video, what I'm going to be doing is going over in excruciating detail about how I laid out this multicolor epoxy pour to result in this American Wavy Flag. It's a 5-color pour. I've got gold, blue, white, red, and black all in this epoxy inlay. And I do this quite a bit. I have several videos out there, and I recently did a live video in where I discussed the overview process for this specific board, which I made for the 4th of July. And in that video, people requested that I go into detail about how I laid this out, including the concept of overlap between vectors to make sure you get nice, crisp lines. So in this video, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to go into excruciating detail on how I go about that process. If you're already familiar with multicolor epoxy inlays, you may not need to go through this in detail by detail. Or if you are, and you had some challenges with wood peeking through or other challenges because the overlap wasn't quite right, then this will be worth your time. I think it'll be worth your time no matter what, unless you're an expert in this process. But just in case, I'm going to put it all out there. This is a long video. It's over an hour, and it's broken up into the following sections for you to pick what you think is worth watching, what's not worth watching, and what you can fast forward through. Here, let me get a little cheater that my friend Jay Bates uses to make sure I go over the key parts of this video. So the first part of this video is going to cover how I imported the graphic into the Vectrix software, and then I took that graphic, an American Wavy Flag, and I broke it up into various layers that I was going to use for pouring my epoxy. That's my common methodology, is to put my layers all in the colors I'm going to pour and in the order I'm going to pour them so I can think through the process. So that's step number one. Step number two, because people get confused when I talk about overlap, they requested more information on overlap. Now, I do have a video out there on overlap that was produced about a year or two ago. If you want to go look at that, I'll put that in the description part of this video. I'll also put a card up in the corner. Not sure which corner it'll appear in because I always get confused about that, but I'll put a card up in the corner. But because I don't want you to sit through all of that video, and I want it to be self-contained and you can stay within this video, I've actually included a section that's about 15 minutes or so that goes over the whole concept of overlap fundamentals, lays it out, and makes some graphical representations for you to get an understanding of what overlap is and why it's needed. And after you go through that process, the next step will be to go through the details of this project. Remember, I took and already broke all the vectors up into layer by layer, and I'll demonstrate which of those layers and which of those vectors require overlap and which don't, and how I achieve that overlap by moving specific nodes and vectors around to get the desired overlap. That'll be a long period of time as we walk through step by step, and if you've had problems understanding overlap and how you set up your vectors for a good carve, this should be very helpful to you. And then once I get done with that, I use my teaching technique, if you've seen some of my other videos, that I used in industry for a long time. And I do the following steps whenever I'm putting an instructional video together. First, I tell you what I'm going to tell you. Then I tell you what I'm telling you so you learn during the first time. And then I review what I told you or tell you what I told you. That may get redundant to some people, but for most people, it helps cement in the knowledge, and that's my technique. So if you already think you've got it all, you don't have to go through the summary. If you already think you know about overlap fundamentals, you don't need to do that. I'm going to mark this video up in timelines, and you can decide what might be helpful and what might not. If you like what you're learning, please support me by giving me the thumbs up or like, comment, share this video. And if you want to see future videos of my ways of teaching, I do that for lasers, CNCs, and 3D printers. Not much on 3D printers yet, but I will be doing more. Go ahead and subscribe. I hope it proves to be a learning experience for you. With that, let's go ahead and get started into the video. So what I want to go through first is the different layers I have and how I set those up. And then once I go through the different layers about what I've set up, then I'll go through and specifically talk about how I set up each layer in the design to be ready for carving the epoxy inlay. So with that, let's get started. Over here on the left, you see the layers list that I've put together. I like to use the layers on the left when I'm trying to get into organizing the layers, because the layers list on the left, I can move each layer up and down in the priority list of what I'm talking about. So I can, for example, of this surfacing layer, if I want to talk about that up on top, I can move it up. Or if I want to keep it down on the bottom, I can move it down. So just a little tip and trick. If you're using this layers menu, you can do that. If you're using the layers menu up here at the top, which is the other place you can look at it, you can't move the layers up and down in where they're located on the list. So when I'm talking about something like I'm going to talk about now, I like to use this layer. And when I'm in the middle of the project, many times you'll see me reach over to this layer. It doesn't matter, they're the same. This one you can just move the layers up and down in the list. With that, let's get started. So the first layer you see and the last layer you see, I don't have it in two places, is this surfacing layer. This surfacing layer, this is a tool path that I have developed for the project when I want to surface the board. And I surface the board at 2 times, you'll see. One is before I start the epoxy inlay, and the last time is when I'm clearing off the epoxy inlay. So we'll talk about that more later. The next layer I have is a guide layer, and this layer is simply for helping me lay out all the vectors, and I'll be going through each vector and explaining how I do that throughout this video. So that's all I'm going to use this for, and we'll talk more about that later. I tend to take all of my layers and I lay them out in the way I'm going to pour my epoxy. So my first pour is going to be a white pocket pour, and it's going to be everywhere that I want white. So I'm going to use white as my base color. That'll become clearer in a few minutes. And so the stars are white, and then I've got white stripes. So the first pour I'll do is this white. And one thing I'll point out is you'll notice it's just slightly past the guide layer, and it's about 0.05 inches past the guide layer. I'll show that in a minute. The next layer that I have on here is my red stripes. So I'm going to pour the white epoxy first, and you'll see that when I show and demonstrate the actual carving in the board and the pouring of the epoxy. The next layer I'm going to pour after I've got the white hard is my red stripes. And so you can see those right in this area right here. Each of these are red stripes. I will point out right now a couple overlaps that are obvious. If we look in here, you can see that the red overlaps the guide into the white on the top, and on the side it overlaps the guide, and on the bottom it overlaps the guide and goes into the white. And I'm not worried about going a little bit past the white because I'll have a gold border. You will also see when I put up the blue vectors that it overlaps the blue. And that is so that we have nice crisp lines, and I'll talk more about overlap in a little bit. So I'm looking at overlapping certain colors to allow us to have the exact sizes we want and the look of the design. So in this case, we've got our red stripes, and they're going to be carved directly into white. So as long as I make the red stripes exactly the size that I want them, the white stripes, which are already there by the time I've poured the red, will be exactly where I want them. The next thing you'll see is the blue field, And that's where the white stars are going to go in. Now, to make sure that the white stars can appear, I actually need two vectors. I need this blue vector here, and I need these stars vectors. And what I'll be doing is I'll be doing a vCarve toolpath between the blue outer field and each of these stars. And because I've already poured the white, these stars will be left proud. And then I will pour in the blue epoxy. And when I get done with that, I'll have the blue, the red, and the white all in the locations they need to be. And once again, you'll notice this blue, which is a third pour, overlaps the red stripes on this side and overlaps the white on this side, or the guide. And that becomes important for understanding how everything's going to lay out as we go down the process of pouring this project. The next set of layers that you'll see are the gold border. So what I'm doing is, if you look here at this gold portion, and you look at this area and this area, let me turn it off again so you can see what I'm talking about. See, the gold, once the blue is hard and the red is hard and the white is hard and everything else, you'll see this gold border goes way outside those vectors, and then it comes inside those vectors by about 0.05 or so. I think it's 0.05. We'll measure it in a little bit. And that allows us to make sure that we have a nice crisp line around the flag on the red and the blue here. And it will make sure that everything, when we get said and done, is exactly the size we want it to be. The next vector you see is the black text. And I'm going to open up two layers here. One is the black text, and the other one is the text on the curve. To get the curve on text guide, I simply duplicated a red stripe vector, and then when I did the curve on the text, you can see I put that above the vector. Once I have all of the epoxy poured and hardened, then I will go ahead and use this surfacing toolpath. This one doesn't really matter here. That's an artifact. Let me get rid of that right now. And I will surface the epoxy off, and I'll talk about how I do that here in a minute. And then once that's all surfaced off, then I'll go in and I'll create a pocket toolpath and a roundover toolpath to clear out my dip area that I put in. And so I've got a little pocket here for a dip. And I'll show you that as we go through it. And then once I have the pocket and dip in, the next thing I want to do is cut the tray completely out. And once the tray is completely out, then I can go into the finishing process, and that will be after I do this software tool. So all of the physical work I'm going to do after the software. I'm just telling you how I'm setting the software up to cut the board and do this part of the project. So let me turn these vectors back off for a second. So now all the vectors are off. Let me go through the process of bringing in the actual flag that I used, the vectors or the graphic that I used, and how I went about laying out the layers. I didn't keep that in this file, so I'll go back and grab that and bring it in. And you'll notice that I left this guide here to allow me to come in here and look at something for a second. I'm going to look at the size of that guide using the resize tool. So I'm going to make a note that that size of that axis is 8.5221. And I will go ahead and copy that, but I made the note in case I lose the copy, and I'm going to hit close. And so for that reason, I can go ahead and turn off this guide now so I don't create any confusion. We'll come back to the layer. Let me turn off the guide. And the thing I want to do now is import, using the import a bitmap or vectors, the graphic that I used to start this whole project. And I had gone to the internet and looked for royalty-free and free wavy flags, and this is one that I picked out to use for my project. and you can see what it is right here. And I'm going to group this for a second by hitting G, or you could have hit group over here. And I'm going now to center that, and I can do that by hitting the F9 key, function F9, or I could do it by coming over here and clicking here. Now I've centered that in the middle of my project, and if you recall, I wanted my flag to be the width, and we're going to go back over here to the resize tool, and I'd copied it. Let's see if it stayed. Control V, I copied and then I just pasted in what my actual design was that I had decided on before. I copied that in there, left the link XY in place, and now I apply it. Now, if everything worked right immediately, let's go back and make sure this outer line will line up with my guide. So let me open the layer and turn on the guide, and you can see that it didn't completely line up, and that is because I had a dip tray over here, so it wasn't supposed to be specifically in the middle. So let me align this graphic with where I want my flag to actually be. So I click on the grouped vectors, hit shift and select the other one that I want to use, go back to design, and then I am going to center that object inside the last vector that I selected. And now you can see it lines up perfectly with the guide. And I'm going to go ahead and take the guide now, and I'm going to turn that off so that I don't create confusion as I start to lay out the vectors. So now we have those vectors from the American flag graphic that I imported that was a free, royalty-free graphic, and it's sitting in my project. And you can see that it is in its own layer. And if I ungroup it by hitting U or ungroup back onto original layer, all of those were on the American flag graphic layer. So I'll turn that off and you see they're all gone. So right now there is no conflict with any of the other layers that I created. So now we're going to go through the process, and this can take a while, of setting up the layers. So the next step is to set up the vectors. And when we set up the vectors, the key thing we have to remember is to make sure that we have the correct amount of overlap so that when we mill the epoxy flag down, we don't have any wood or other artifacts exposed. We want nice crisp lines. For those of you that haven't watched my previous video on how the V-bits cut to certain depths and overlapping vectors, I'll put a card up in the corner on that. But if you haven't watched that, I've gone ahead and included an overlap fundamentals review. Hopefully this will be clear. The goal will be to show why overlap is needed and what it does for us. If you've already seen that video or are familiar with the overlap concept in the epoxy multicolor pour process, then you can just skip ahead to the next part of this tutorial. Let's take a minute and review the overlap fundamentals if you've not followed along before. What we have here is a test card, and I have a group of vectors, one that I'm going to cut with a 15-degree V-bit, one with a 30-degree V-bit, and you can see the width of the vectors there at the top. And the goal is to show what happens when you use a vCarve toolpath with each of these vectors with no overlap. So I'm going to demonstrate in this little preview what happens when you cut these vectors with no overlap using a 15-degree V-bit and a 30-degree V-bit in the attempt to try and show you why overlap is important. So I've set up, if you look over there on the right, a couple toolpaths, a 30-degree V-bit toolpath, a 15-degree vCarve toolpath, and I've set up a milling toolpath for later when I want to surface this. And so I'm demoing in this block. If I run the toolpath for the 30-degree and 15-degree bits, what does that look like? And as you can see by this mimic, when you look at the sides there, You see how far it's going down, and the reason they're flat is because we put a 0.125 depth, and we've got a 15-degree V-bit and a 30-degree V-bit, and look at the mountain peaks that are underneath each of those, and you can tell that that is the wood or the underlying material. So the V-bit cuts with a peak right at the very top of where those two vectors joined because there was no overlap. It is also demonstrating how deep it would go if it doesn't reach the flat depth. So we're going to assume this base material in the mountain peaks is wood for this discussion. And then I'm going to want to demonstrate that when I mill this down by 0.2 inches, not very much, which is a half a mil, what happens to those peaks and how they get exposed so that you don't have crisp lines between the colors of the epoxies you're pouring. Assume that each of these vCarve tool paths have a different color of epoxy so that they're supposed to be married right to each other, and look what happens when you mill that down with no overlap. I'm pointing out that I want you to watch the top. I'm first going to mill down the 30-degree side of the bits, and then I'm going to mill down the 15-degree side of the bits, and then we're going to compare what we see between the colors of epoxy. And I hope this demonstration will make it clear to you why we need to use some amount of overlap. Remember, this has no overlap at this time. So I need to turn this over to the side here so you can get a better look. But you can see the flat tops, the flat peaks right there on the top that my cursor is pointing to. That's what I'm trying to show you, is that as I milled it down, we exposed the wood mountain peaks underneath, which then does not result in a nice, clean looking picture or epoxy inlay. You can see that it was a little less drastic on the 15-degree, and if I turn this, what you can see is that you have wood peeking through here on the top of the 30-degree, and a little bit of wood peeking through on the 15-degree also, and that will take away from the look of your vCarve. So what we need to do is make it so that when we mill this material down, you don't have that wood or underlying material peeking through. And that's what we use overlaps for. So I'm going to set this same project up, but this time I'm going to use a small overlap of 0.005 inches overlap, 0.005. Normally, Shane recommends somewhere between 0.1 and 0.05. 0.05 is pretty heavy for smaller vectors, but it assumes that you have the best chance of not uncovering some kind of underlying material. So what you see here are the vectors set up in the same sizes, but now we've got an overlap, like I said, of 0.005. And let's watch what happens when we carve these same vectors with those same V-bit toolpaths we did before. 15-degree on the left, 30-degree on the right. All right, we've got them set up to run. And now we're running those bits. And to get a good picture, I'm going to have to turn this over at a different angle because it's not real obvious what you're looking at. But I think you can see that the peaks are below the top of the wood now. So the colors with the vCarve are actually overlapping each other, and whichever color had the last V-bit run on it, it will be the color that's most predominant on top. But as you start to mill it down, they will come down evenly, and you will have no wood in between. You'll have a nice crisp line between the two colors that you poured. And I wished I could show the colors in there so that it would be easier, but I don't have a way to do that. I'm showing there that the wooden peaks are not likely to show through, and now we're going to mill it like we did before. And first we'll do the 30-degree bit, and then we'll do the 15-degree bit, and we're going down 0.02 inches once again, which again is a half a millimeter. Now we're doing the 15-degree, and if we take a look at this, you will see on the 15-degree there is no wood on the top that you can see going down. It's the bit, the way the V-bit worked, it left no wood. And on the 30 degree, there is a small line. So a 0.005 overlap probably isn't sufficient to ensure that you don't have wood or some underlying color peeking through. And that's why Shane has a bigger minimum overlap to make sure you have nice, crisp interfaces. I hope this makes it clear why we have overlap. And as you can see, the smaller the bit, less chance of needed overlap. We just finished the video on overlap fundamentals. I hope that gave you a good foundation of why overlap is important, and also why Shane generally recommends, which of course I recommend because he's my mentor, an overlap of about 0.05 if possible. That really removes all doubt with most vectors of having the wood or the underlying colored epoxy peek through as you start to mill your material. The vector overlap I used in the video just to be able to demonstrate what I'm talking about with a 15 degree and 30 degree V-bit was of course 0.005. And you could see that that wasn't nearly enough for a 30 degree V-bit and may have just barely covered a 15 degree V-bit. We're going to use an overlap typically of around 0.02 to 0.05, and that's what you'll see in the rest of this video. Is I'm trying to shoot for about 0.05. There might be some cases where I go down to 0.03, and because I'm making a white pocket pour, that overlap isn't as critical, say, between the red and the white stripes, but it does get critical between the blue field and the red and the gold border that I'm going to put on as we go through the rest of the video. So in the rest of the video, we're going to go into significant detail, and I'm going to show you vector by vector how I lay that out and get the proper overlap. Again, as a reminder, if you like what you're watching right now, while you're thinking about it, because I forget all the time, give me that, you know what, that thumbs up. Give me a comment at the end of the video if there's something you wished you would have seen. And if you want to see the follow-on video, which will be me going through the details of setting up this project to carve, then make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the all bell for this channel. So let's get started. We just went through explaining the importance of overlap, and I tried to demo that. I hope it was useful to some of you that have not been through that process before. Coming back to the point before we overlapped, I had imported this flag, this American Wavy Flag that I had gotten from the internet. And now the next step is, knowing the importance of overlap, is we need to go through the process of laying out all of these vectors or layers, I'll call it, that we're going to cut and make sure there's proper overlap between the various vectors. So we start out with the American flag, and I'm going to walk through this. And I think it's important that I walk through step by step so you see exactly what I'm doing. And I will be talking through what my thoughts are and why I'm doing it as I go about the process. So the first thing I want to do is, I've got this laid out here so you can see what the layers are as I'm going through the process. But I'm going to go ahead now and go to the Design tab. Before I do, note the first vector that I'm actually going to set up is the guide. And then I'm going to try to follow this series as much as I can. First set up the guide, then set up the white pocket, and then I'm going to go ahead and set up the other layers as I go through there. I'll go through the red stripes, the blue field stars, black text, etc. So this could take a while. You may want to put it on a little bit faster speed if I'm talking too slow and you can follow it. But I think it's important, if you want to know how to lay out one of these multicolor epoxy vectors, what we mean by overlap, which I explained, but now how to apply that theory in reality. So that's where we're headed. So let's start out with the first set of vectors, which I will call the guide, you might recall. So I'm going to come in here, and this one's tricky because we have red stripes and we have white stripes. And so I want to grab the vector that is going around the entire flag and turn that into the guide. And I think you can see that right here. If you look, this dotted line here goes all the way around and you can see it going all the way around the flag. So that is going to be our guide. And so I'm going to know I got all of the various elements of this flag by moving them to the appropriate positions in our layer tree. And so that I don't mess up my original ones, you're going to see me develop these guides or these layers as demo down below. And then I'll compare the demo ones to what I actually used to cut the project. The first layer that I want to create, I want to add a new layer, and I'm going to call that the guide demo. And that's the way I created this guide layer up here. So now that I've got the outer layer selected, I'm going to move that layer so that I can keep track of what I've already done down to this guide demo layer. And I'm going to make sure that I turn that off, and you can see that part of the flag moved. And I know that I want the white pocket to be slightly outside of the red stars. And I'm going to go ahead and use a 0.05 offset for that. Before I do that, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to say white pocket demo. And I'm going to pour that all as one color, white. And so what I do is I select that to make sure it's the active layer. I come over here, I select the offset tool, and I'm going to offset that by 0.05. I think that's the number I used. I'm going to keep create sharp corners on, and I'm going to select the new one, and this will end up being my white pocket when I'm done. Hit offset, and now you see I've got this vector. Hit close. I'm going to come over to the layers again and make sure that if I turn that off, that goes away, so it went on the right layer. I'm going to color this a different color. I'm going to call it blue. I normally called it green up here, but I'm just going to call it blue for this demo so that I can differentiate between my other guide. Let me check to see if that's exactly what I did before. And you can see how the green and the blue are right on top of each other. Actually, the green is slightly more, so I might have made that 0.06 or something. Let's see what it says. So originally, it looks like I might have offset that 0.07. And that happens as you start to adjust, as you go through the design, you start to adjust what you want. And so I think I will go ahead and readjust that. I'll hit Command Z. And now I'm going to go back over to the layers. I'm going to make sure that's selected. I'm going to go to Design, and I'm going to offset that 0.07 like I did previously. Hit Enter. And now I've taken that, adjusted to 0.07, close, and you can see that the green and blue layer, or the white pocket layers, are right on top of each other. Let me turn off the official white pocket layer that I had from before. And now we've got our white pocket layer, and we have got our guide, and we've got the rest of the American flag. So the next step on this process is then to move over the red stripes, because you see I have that up here. So we're going to grab the red stripes now. We're going to move those to a new layer. I'm going to add a new layer here called Red Stripes Demo. And I'm going to make that the active layer. And I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to try to collect the red stripes. And that can be a little tricky. So I'm going to zoom in here. You see I've got that stripe there. And then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to hold the Shift key. I'm going to grab the next stripe. So that's red, red. This will be red. This bottom one is red. Skip one. This will be white. This will be red. I grabbed the wrong vector there. So let's see if we can get it. I'm going to move these other ones right now before I lose them. So I'm going to move those to the layer called Red Stripes Demo. And I'm going to turn that a different color. And when I'm doing it officially, I would turn it red, as you can see up on top here, but I'm going to turn it this color right here, this dark green, so that I know that I already moved those. Okay, and now I'm going to come over here to the next red. Let's go down here and see if I can work my way up. That's actually the guide. Let me turn off the guide demo. So that's part of what's causing me my trouble. So now let's go to here to red. All right, now it's going to be easier. Hit shift over here and hit shift over here, and that should be the rest of the reds. And I'm going to move those. I right click that, move to layer, Red Stripes Demo. And now they should all be on the Red Stripes Demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the other layers and the flag. And you can see there's our red stripes. Remember how many we should have? 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got our red stripes separated out. One thing I'll point out to you is we're going to need to apply overlap to these later down the road. But for now, we're just going to leave them the way they are until I start going through the overlap process. All I'm trying to do is separate them on their separate layers to make it easier to deal with. And that's what I always do. Go to the separate layers, get everything separated by color and how I'm going to pour it, and then I move on to doing the overlaps. With that, let's go back and turn on the American flag. Let's turn off the red stripes, and you can see what we have left are stripes that we're not actually going to need with this demo, but because of the way I'm setting it up. But I want those on their own layer for later when I want to come back if I want to do something different. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to move these to a new layer, and I'm going to call that White Stripes Demo. And you won't see an equivalent layer up above because I decided to pour white as a pocket, but I just want to keep them there. And so I have them. I'll use this color, hit OK, and now I'll turn those off because I don't need those. Let's turn on what I have so far. I have a guide demo. That's going to be my borders. I have a white pocket demo because I already decided instead of doing each stripe individually, I'm going to do a pocket first and then carve into that with the red. And I've got the red stripes that I'm going to have to modify with proper overlap. And then I have the white stripes, which I'm not even going to show because I'm not going to use those in the overlap or the process. So let me turn those all off. And the next step I need to do is I need to set up my blue field because that is going to require some overlap. So I need to have that on a separate layer. So I'm going to grab this field and I'm going to move this to a new layer, and I'm going to call that Blue Field Demo. Hit OK. And over here I'm going to make that red because I know I didn't use that color for blue. Now you're asking why I make these different colors. Hopefully I explained it well enough. I don't want it to conflict with my final version because what I'm going to do is as I do these overlaps, I'm going to go back and check against what my original overlap was and how I did. So now I have the blue field. The last thing I want to do is I want to take these stars and put them on their own layer, and this will work out when I'm trying to carve the pocket for blue with the vCarve toolpath. We'll demonstrate that later. So I'm going to move these to a layer, new layer, and I'm going to put stars demo, and I'm going to make that color similar to what I did with the blue field demo. I'll make it red. Hit OK. So now I have all of my, turn that off. I should have all of my American flag, and you can see it's empty, on my various layers. So now I've moved everything there, and I know that my American flag graphic is covered. So the next step is, let's turn these all on for a second. If I look at it, you can see that's how the flag is laid out in layers. And remember, I do my work by color layers. The first one was white. We're going to pour the pocket in there, and I know I repeat myself sometimes, but I'm trying to bring things around and make it clear in my teaching style. The next thing I need to do is I need to either do the red or the blue, however I want. But before I do that, I'm going to do gold. I'm going to have a gold border, and that gold border is going to go around the outside of the white, so it takes care of the white, and it's going to come inside to the guide area or so to make sure that I overlap the red that's going to be poured. And I'm going to bring the red top and the red bottom, I'm going to bring those all the way up past the guide so that we have a nice border around it. It'll become clear as we go about doing that. In fact, let me show you where the gold border is right now as I already designed it. So let me turn on the gold border real quick. And I think you can see that the gold border comes up. And if we look at the distance, let's take a distance, and I go from the guide that we already have, you can see that the gold border is about 0.25 inches from the gold, from the guide. And if you look at it from the white that we established, it's about 0.1299. So it's a big overlap, and that's okay, because in the end, what we want is a nice gold border that's about 1/4 inch or so thick around the whole flag. Again, I'll show you that. Let's go over here where it might be a little easier, come across, and you can see the border is 0.2038 inches wide, and that's how big it'll be when we carve it. That allows us to have it plenty wide enough to get an 1/8 inch clearance bit in there. So let me turn off the gold border again, and let me come over to the layers. I'm going to turn off the gold border, and I'm going to turn off the American flag. I'm going to leave the guide demo on. And now we're going to set up our gold border. So on our gold border, let's see here. I think I wanted this to be about 0.25, 0.20. It doesn't matter if I match it exactly from my original design, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call it Gold Border Demo. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to offset that out 0.2 inches, I think. So I'm going to come down here, offset, outwards, 0.2, roughly. Create sharp corners because we have the sharp corners there. Hit offset, and now that's my new gold border. Let me validate that I had that on the active border, gold border demo. Let me turn on the other gold border, and you can see it rides right over the top of that. Turn that off. And then the other thing I need to do is close this. I need to take the demo piece, and I need to copy, not move, copy that to gold border demo. And we come back down here to layers, and I'll turn off the guide, and you can see this is the gold border. Let's turn the gold border, this rust color, and let's lay the final gold border on that to make sure I set that up like I did before. There you see it rides right on top. So now what we have is our gold border around there. So we turn on the key pieces. Let's turn on the guide. Let's turn on the white. And let's turn on the gold. What you can see is the gold border is going to bound the white. So anything within the gold border, that's going to be the last cut we do. And it's going to come through and clear out any overlaps that we have. So the next step is to overlap the various areas that we want to overlap. So let's go ahead and start with the blue field. How about we start there? So there's the blue field. And we know that we're going to need this field to overlap into above this guide, which is where the gold's going to cut. So we need it to go above the gold border here and no higher than the white, but the white really isn't that important. Just as long as it goes sufficiently high above the gold bottom, we'll be okay. We also know, to keep the flag proportions correct, that we need to keep this right edge and this bottom edge the same. So the only areas we need to move are those that are going into the border. So that's our next step, is we're going to go ahead and move that. And to do that, I'm going to make sure that I've got the blue field demo located correctly. So that's my default. And then I'm going to go to the design. I'm going to hit N for node mode. And this is where things start to get a little tricky, because you're pulling these nodes. And our goal is we're going to pull this side of the flag out so that it's to the white area, I'll call it, to the white border, right close to it. It can be a little shy, a little out, it doesn't matter, but we want it at that far to get the nice overlap with the gold border inside. And one of the things I've noticed is, as I try to grab nodes, sometimes I'll grab these Bezier pieces, and that will then create an issue, because instead of grabbing the node like I want to, I find myself grabbing the Bezier. So the first thing I like to do, we'll start over here with this one, is I'm going to highlight that, and I'm going to hit D for delete. And I'm going to come here, D for delete, and I'm working on a Mac, so sometimes my shortcut keys are a little different and they don't work quite the way I want them to. And I'm going to turn off the gold border, because it will want to get in the way sometimes, and we don't need it, because we know we just need to go out to the white. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit delete there. And so I'm just going through right now and taking out the ones that I know may create issues for me. So D there, D there. I'm going to insert one. I'm going to insert a vector, say right here, that I probably shouldn't have deleted the other one. And you ask me why? Well, because this is going to be my anchor. I don't want this to move, because this has the shape of the stripe below it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this vector and I'm going to move it out just close to the white. If it's on the white, that's fine. At the white, that's okay too. Just shy of the white, that's okay too. Either one will work. Now I'm going to go up to this other vector, and I want this vector to be up in the corner. So I'm going to make sure I'm grabbing the right one. Yep, I'm grabbing the right one. This is the guide, this is the vector. I'm going to pull this way up here. And I'm going to take this one here, and I'm going to pull this up here. See, I'm just shy of the white, right at the white. And then I can come over here now, and this is extra. I can delete that one, and you can see that gives me a nice straight line down there. And then what I want to do is come over to this other corner. So I'm going to go to each corner first. And on this corner, I want to make sure this is anchored, because I don't want this to move, because this is the regulation size of the flag for the vector. So I want to take this one next to it, and I want it to move, and I want to make sure from this point down, everything is nice and straight. So now I can take some of these vectors in the middle and move these up. I'm going to move this one to here, this one to here. This one, these two I'm going to go ahead and just delete. And I'm going to move this one here, and I'm going to move this one here, and I'm going to delete this one. After deleting that last vector, let's go in here and see what we got. Hit node again. So that's my blue. Let me turn off my guide in my white pocket and just look at my blue. That looks good. Let's turn on the white pocket. And you can see it comes right along the white pocket. So I like the way that works. And we never changed the right side or the left side. So now the next step, let me turn the guide back on for just a second, is to switch over to the red stripes. Let me turn on the red stripes for just a second. So when I turn on the red stripes, what I want you to notice is, let me turn off the white pocket right now. So what you can see when we're looking at the red stripes is we want each of these red stripes to stay the same width, I'll call it, from, let me show you what I mean, from, if we're measuring the distance on a red stripe from there to there, we don't want that to change. Since we are engraving into the white, we know they won't change anywhere where we're engraving into the white. But where we need to go out into the gold border up here, and on the sides, the left side and the right side, which go into the gold border, those stripes are going to need to go past the guideline and towards the white. Let's turn on the white. And so they need to go, turn on the white right there. So they have to go out to the white area past the guide, because when you turn on the gold, as you can see, the red stops at the gold, so there'll be overlap issues. So you want to take these red stripes and move them into the area of the gold, and you want to take these red stripes and move them into the area of the blue field. So on the side, right side and left side, each of the stripes need to move. On the bottom, they need to move down, nothing in the middle, and then on the top, it needs to move up. And that's what you're going to see me doing now. Again, it's a long process, node by node, but what I'm looking for is, as I pull the red stripe up in the top, then I'm watching it as it comes up. And I can't just do a rampant pull, because when I'm pulling each of these stripes out, because of the curved angle, if this was straight, not a wavy flag, if this was straight, I could just grab all of these and move them out. But I can't do that because I've got to maintain this angle right here, or the stripe won't look right. So I have to maintain these angles here and on the edges wherever they're going to be cut off. Hopefully that'll become clear as we go through the node editing process and walk through this. So let's start now. What I need is, I don't need the guide, because I can use the white as the thing to look at. I don't need the gold, because I know that if I'm up towards the white, I'm not in the gold. So I don't need the gold border. All I need is, for the first set, I'll go ahead and do along the blue field. So I'll leave the blue field up for now. And I don't need the white pocket right now for the field, for the red stripes going into the field. And I'm going to do it this way right now so that I have as few vectors as possible that I can interact with. And so we're going to go to the node mode. I'm going to grab this red vector. I'm going to go to the node mode by hitting N, or I can actually, well, let me put the stripes, the stars up too, because I want to watch how far I'm moving them in. And for me, I can do this a number of different ways, but I know if I go in here at least 0.05, to 0.03, somewhere in that area, I'm going to be okay. And since it's just straight up and down, I'm going to use another guide. I'm going to come out here, right, line this guide up right on that blue union. Remember, that's the blue union right there. I'm going to create a relative guide, relative, and I'm going to come in negative 0.05. And I know that gives me plenty of room, and I don't have to come in that far, but at least I know that'll give me a guide. So I'm going to create a new guide. I'm going to get rid of this guide right here. And so I know if I come in at least that far, I'm in good shape. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come in that far, and I'm going to start moving these. So we're going to go hit the node mode, hit N for node mode, or you could select it with the effector. And I want to make sure, this is where we can get messed up. I want to make sure I'm not in the blue field demo. I want to make sure that my active layer is the red stripes, because I want them to stay on the red stripes when I move everything. All right. So I'm going to work just around the blue union at this time. I'm going to use these corners as anchors. So I'm going to take this node right here, and I'm going to pull it out over into this area. That's 0.05, and I know that will be fine. And I'm going to take this other Bezier curve node, and I want to make sure that that is as straight as possible right here as it goes over. So I've got that coming in, and I want to maintain that shape. So I'm going to move it up just a little more. It's all by eye. Make sure it's nice and straight coming in. And I'm going to move this up a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good. This, I'll go ahead and I'll bring that way in. Now I'll go up to the other corner. Remember, I told you I work with the corners first. I'm going to take this one right here. I'm going to move it out. Move this Bezier here. Move this one down a little bit now. Turn the Bezier over there a little bit. Turn the Bezier there. And now that's got a nice, good, straight ramp. Now, if I had my druthers, normally I should be able to collect this off, and that should become just not a smooth mode, but for some reason that's not working for me on my Mac. I don't know if it's a bug with version 12 or if it's a problem with my Mac. Most times you should be able to just click on this, right click it, and if you unclick the smooth, it should become a regular point. It's not working that way for me, but you can try that if you like. I'm just going to move on because I'm going to deal with what I got for right now. So we're in the node mode, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this node and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to take this node and I'm going to delete it. And now you can see it just goes straight down. So we've got one of our red stripes done. And now we're going to go through and I'm going to do each one the same way, and I'll go ahead and speed this up. But you've got the idea. I'm leaving an anchor node, moving it out. Then I'm deleting inside. So let me go ahead and do that, but I'm going to speed this up when I actually show this in the video. So now you can see that I've got all of the stripes that are going to overlap with the blue union overlapped on the left side. And I'm going to turn off the blue field now. The next step is take all these stripes and bring them over the edge into the gold border. So let me turn on what I'm talking about here. I'm going to turn on the guide or the white pocket, either one, and I'm going to pull them out towards that white pocket. And if I get out there, then I know I have plenty of room when I turn on the gold border. As you can see, the gold border will be where these are stopping right now. So now we're going to go through that. And once again, I'm going to use the corners always as an anchor point. I'll demo the first one. So I've turned on the nodes. I leave this as the anchor point because that's where the gold is going to come down, and that's where you're going to see the interface between the gold and the red stripe. And I'm going to pull this one out. Going to make sure that that angle stays pretty good. And if when you're doing yours on your Windows computer, if it allows you to turn this one into a non-smooth mode, that would be even better. But for some reason on my Mac, when I try to turn it off, it doesn't work. So now we're going here. Remember, I'm not grabbing. This is my anchor point. This is the one that stays on the guide. And I turned off the guide because I don't want to have to accidentally mess with those nodes. So I bring that down here. Keep that angle pretty good. This is good. You won't see this because the gold is going to go inside here. Then I'm going to go around and delete that one. And so that's what you're going to see me do now. I'm going to speed up the screen, but I'm going to go through the process of moving all of these vectors so you can see how I'm doing it, but it will be sped up considerably. So here we go. So now, because this is a bottom stripe, I need to also come down into the bottom here, and I'll have to come back up and fix the top up here and do the same thing. But I'm going to show you right now how I'm moving the bottom down, and it's the same thing I did with the blue field, because the gold's going to come over the edge, but I'm not going to move the rest of any of these other stripes. And I just want to demonstrate that now. And so I'm going to take this one here, and I'm going to move it down into this corner, and I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to move this down. This down. Again, I'm not trying to get right on the white. If I'm a little shy of the white, that's okay. It's not that critical. I keep accidentally grabbing the handle versus the node. So let's get the node. There we go. Delete that node. All right, so let me take a quick look down here at the bottom. I just got to be close. It doesn't have to be perfect. As I said, as long as I'm somewhat within the white area there. All right, that looks good. And now we do the same thing on this side. Put up the anchors. All right, now we've gone through and adjusted the bottom and the left. Let's take a quick look at where the gold is. So the gold, as you can see, bounds those areas. So now we need to finish up the left side and the top. So we need to finish the top of this red stripe and the left sides of these red stripes. So let's go and fast forward again. Okay, at this point, we've got the full left side, we've got the bottom, we've got the full right side. The only thing we need to do now is pull up the red stripe on the top where the gold border will come down. Let me point the gold border again. So you can see it's right on the edge. So now we pull this one up like we did the others. Pull that one straight up. So now we've got the top of the stripe pulled up. Let's go ahead and put the gold border, just do a quick check. So when we do a quick check, we can see that the stripes are all within the gold border. So it'll be bounded. Now let's put up the blue field. We can see that the blue field, which will be the last thing I carve and pour, bounds the stripes here on the left side. And this is not a red stripe, this is a white stripe, so you're going right into the white epoxy, so no worries about overlap there. And we can see that the blue field overlaps the gold border and all the stripes overlap the gold border. And remember, there are really no white stripes because those are the first pour we're going to do. So now when we look, if we turn on everything, we've got all of the overlaps perfectly assigned where we need them to be. And because of that, we can now start to lay out the tool path. So this is the most complicated part of the whole process of setting up your multi-layer epoxy for pouring. And let's do a quick review. The first thing I did was I took the original graphic and broke it into the vectors by the pours that I was going to make. And you'll see when I set up my tool path, that's the philosophy I'm using. The first one that I set up was the guide, and then I could work everything off of that. And once I had the guide set up, I set up the white pocket, which went 0.05 past the guide. Then after I had the guide set up, I set up the red stripes, and before I started worrying about overlap, I just got them onto their own vectors. Then I took the white stripes from the graphic and put it on another layer, which I'm not going to use in this demo, but I'm going to keep it for later projects. And then I did the blue field. And on the blue field, I made it so that it would overlap into the top and on the left, but not on the bottom because it was right at the right size for the red stripe alignment. And remember, this is a white epoxy pour that will not be cut into other than for the blue and the red stripes. And then I set up the vectors for the stars, and I also set up the gold border. And when I set up the gold border, I set it up off the guide so that at the end, this will be the last pour, and it will cut into the tops of the red, the tops of the blue, the left of the blue, the left of the red, the bottom of the red stripe, and the right of the red stripe. And it will perfectly bound everything and keep all the red stripes at the right size and the blue field at the right size. And we will have what we want. I went back and I made sure that I turned on the blue field. I made sure that my blue field was overlapping here. And the stars really don't have any need for overlap because they're going to be left when I carve the blue field. They were poured white in the first pour, and they'll be left when I pour the blue field and I carve the blue field. Now that we've gone through all the vector layers set up for the flag proper, the next thing to talk about is I had decided to add some text "In God We Trust" to my flag. And I want to show you how I did that simply using the Text on Curve tool. The next set of vectors I'm going to set up is the text. So I'm going to add a new layer, and that one's going to be Text Demo. And then I'm going to add one more new layer because I like to keep it simple. Text on Curve. Let me add Demo there. So now I've got two new layers, and I'm going to set up the text. So the text, I'm going to make that the highlight layer. I'm going to go to the text tool, and I'm going to let me just put it up here on top right now. In God We Trust. And I used the freshman font. I think I need to separate out these a little bit to make the epoxy. I'm not sure I did a good enough job there to my full satisfaction, but let's go ahead and separate in between. So I'm going to see if I can explode up here. If I get in between and I were to left click, those would go together. You can tell by the little symbol there showing them moving closer together. hit the shift key, then they move out. If I just hit it without the shift key, then they stay close. Just putting a little spacing between them. And I could have done the whole line at one time. Sometimes it's easier for me just to go through step by step. I'm holding the shift key as I select these. And if I didn't hold the shift key, then they would move together. So I'm going to hit close. And if I need to, I'll adjust these at the end. So now hit close. Now I have the text right there. The next thing I need to do is put them where I want them. And I want them right here on what's going to be a white stripe. To do that, I need to have a nice open vector line that I can put it on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this line, this vector, which is a red stripe, and I'm going to copy it, not move, copy it as a layer to the text on curve demo right here. And what I did in the original one is I put it on that other vector that was up above that said text on curve. And then what I need to do is I'm going to come over here to the layers real quickly, and I'm going to turn off the red stripes, blue field, stars, everything else, gold barrier, white, guide, everything that's going to interrupt me and get me confused. I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it into an open vector, select the node mode, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to delete that span. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to delete this span. I'm going to go out of the node mode, select this vector, delete that vector. And now I have this guide right here. And I can take the text and go over to the text on curve tool right here. I want it to go above the curve and I want it to be centered. So I select over here and you can now see that I've got In God We Trust following the red stripe. And let's see if it's got a good enough size. So we'll go back and turn on the other vectors, particularly the red stripes. And you can see that it can be bounded right in the center there and be right on top of that stripe. So it's exactly where I need it. So now I have the text. Let's go turn on the other vectors. I don't need the guide. I don't need the flag. And this is my full flag that I want to do an epoxy pour on. We just finished. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you were able to pick up some insights on how you might do your own epoxy inlay and feel comfortable to get out in the shop and try one. They're a lot of fun, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it if you get around to trying it. I only wanted to cover the process of doing the epoxy inlay layout because it was so detailed and took so long. By now, I imagine your eyes are glazing over because it's been so long. You probably took a break a couple times, at least I would have, but hopefully it was worth your effort and time. I'm hoping it was because I put a lot of effort into trying to do it for you. The next video will go over how I took all those vector overlaps and all those layers and laid them out into specific tool paths, how I poured the epoxy, and how I put in a round over for the edge of the board and for the pocket, and how I carved the pocket, what finish I used and how I did that, and how I put my feet on. With that, until we meet again, go out to the shop, have some fun. You know the rest. Subscribe, like, do all those things. Have a great day.